Hey there, algebra students. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about using square roots to solve quadratic equations. And I am happy to tell you that this is truly an easy lesson. Well, for me, it's an easy lesson anyway. For me, for you, you're going to have to grapple with the existential reality that you've been lied to for much of your mathematical lives. So good luck with that. In this lesson, I'm going to teach you that when you see a problem like this, and actually, what this is it's x equals the square root of 81. Okay, you've been asked to evaluate the square root of 81, right? And you can do that in a heartbeat. What is the square root of 81? You're probably saying it's 9, aren't you? Oh, my sweet child. Um, it is 9, but it's also -9. You see, every square root has a hidden answer, a dark secret, if you will, a negative value that you can plug in. And if you square that negative value, you also get the same value under the radical. So I could plug in 9 for x here and get 81. But did you realize I could also plug in -9 for x? And when I square it, I get 81. And that is a realization you're going to have to carry forward with you for the rest of your mathematical life is that anytime you do a square root, anytime you do a square root, there's likely two correct answers that evaluate that square root. And that's what this lesson's all about. So it's an easy lesson, but it's something I'm going to need you to carry forward with you as a new realization. All right, so how do I solve these? Well, all I need to do to solve the equation x squared equals 81 is take the square root of both sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab my square root symbol here. We're going to make a lot of use of this. Okay, perfect. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to copy that and we'll just use it again and again and again. So we're going to do the square root of x squared equals the square root of 81. Notice what I did to both sides here. I needed to get rid of the x squared on the left. So I took the square root of that side. If I take the square root of one side, that's just like algebra to do this. We have to take the square root of the other side. The square root on the left wipes out the squared. Okay, so now it's just x equals the square root of 81. Hey, what is the square root of 81? Well, you're used to it being 9, but it could also be -9. And there's a correct way to notate that it's both 9 and -9 at the same time. We're going to use the plus or minus symbol. That's this symbol right here. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to, instead of writing 9 or -9, we're going to say the answer is plus or minus 9. Now notice I said plus or minus. It's really the same thing as 9 or -9. X equals 9 or x equals -9. But that's just the easy way for us to write it. All right. Letter B. X squared equals -36, or x equals the square root of -36. Now, this one's going to present a challenge to us. What number do I multiply by itself to get -36? Well, if I multiply 6 by itself, I get positive 36. If I multiply -6 by itself, I get positive 36. There is no number I can multiply by itself, at least no real number I can multiply by itself to give me -36. So when I get to one like letter B, where I have a negative under the radical sign, what I have to do is say there's no real solution to the problem. There's no real solution to the problem. Let's just check in our first couple answers here. Okay, so if you ever have a negative under a radical, you can't do it with the mathematical tools we have available so far. All right, what about this one? I'm going to rewrite this one, subtracting 5 from both sides. This one doesn't look like something I can evaluate, right? Well, if I subtract 5 from both sides, I get x squared equals, oh, I think you see where this is headed, 49. Now I can take the square root of both sides of this. If I take the square root of this side and this side. The square root on the left wipes out the squared, so I'm left with just x equals the square root of 49, which is going to be plus or minus 7. Very important to remember the plus or minus. Letter D. Okay, how am I going to do this one? I'm going to start by adding 75 to both sides. We're going to have 3x squared. Okay, and that equals, let's see, I'm adding 75 to both sides, so it equals 75. Now I need to divide both sides by 3. This doesn't look like something I can solve yet, but when I divide both sides by 3, I get x squared equals 25. All right, now I'm going to take the square root of both sides of this. This is going to give me another perfect square, okay? So square root of x squared equals the square root of 25. Square root of x squared just wipes out the squared. So I'm left with x equals the square root of 25. That's going to be plus or minus 5. Bingo. Letter E. Now, we're going to start getting into some of these that don't have easy answers. X squared equals 72. All right, now, here's the thing. I can't, there's no, 72 is not a perfect square. But I can still do the square root of both sides of this. So I'm going to take my square root sign. We'll do the square root of x squared equals the square root of 72. Did the square root of both sides. That cancels out the x squared. All right, at this point, I just have to use a calculator. And I just need to type in the square root of 72. And that gives me 8.485. So x equals 8.485. But now, because I plugged it into a calculator, I can't just forget that it's actually plus or minus 8.485. Because if I plug in the negative value of 8.485 for x and square it, plug it back into the original equation, square it, I also get positive 72. Okay, so just an important note, when I punch this into a calculator, the calculator is just going to give me the positive version of the square root. I have to remember that there's also a hidden negative version of the square root that I also need to keep in mind. All right, on to letter F. In letter F, we have 5x squared equal. I'm just going to add 60 to both sides right away. 5x squared equals 60. I'm going to divide both sides by 5. 60 divided by 5, let's see, that's going to be 60 divided by 5 is 12. So I get x squared equals 12. Or if I take the square root of both sides, I get x equals the square root of 12. Okay, there's another one. I'm going to have to plug that in. The square root of 12 is 3.464. So I'm going to write 3.464, but I cannot forget that it's actually plus or minus 3.464. All right, let's just check our work on all of these. I haven't been checking as we went along, but I just want to make sure I got them all right. Ooh, for these ones with the more complicated numbers, it looks like I did those correctly. And then lastly, a golf ball is dropped to the ground, dropped from a height of 1,600 feet. Use the equation 16t squared minus 1,600 equals 0 to find how many seconds it takes for the ball to hit the ground. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We need to divide both sides of this by 16. That gives me t squared. Oh, what am I saying? First of all, we need to subtract 1,600 from both sides. I tried to skip a step. That wouldn't have worked out really well. So we get 16t equals 1,600. Okay, 16t equals 1,600. I added 1,600 to both sides. And now I'm going to divide both sides by 16. 1,600 divided by 16 is just 100. So I get t squared equals 100. I'm going to take the square root of both sides of this. That gives me t equals the square root of 100. And the square root of 100 can be evaluated. Square root of 100 is, well, let's think about this for a second. Plus or minus 10 is the square root of 100. So plus or minus 10 is the answer to the equation. Now let's just think about this for a second. Can I have negative 10 seconds? Can the ball hit the ground at negative 10 seconds? That doesn't make sense because I can't go back in time. So the negative answer, I have to ask myself, especially for these word problems, can the negative answer be viable? And the answer is no, the negative answer is not viable. The correct answer is just 10 seconds. I throw away my negative answer because it's not a realistic answer under the circumstances. And that is how you work these problems. You are ready to do the problem set for next time.